guys, welcome to the first episode of Untold Stories by Travel Sea Ride. A chat show where every week I will bring to you one of the most inspiring people from around the world. People would be from any field. It could be fashion, it could be travel, it could be science, it could be food, it could be any field where you can find inspiring stories. These people that I will be interviewing, they would be the ones who would have left their comfort zone to try out something new. And all of them must be doing it for something which is larger than their personal gains. I will bring to you a lot of interesting stories, but for our first episode, we have someone very, very special. He is a keynote speaker, a social media specialist, and a photographer, an ace photographer, I must say, who has been to over 100 countries in the world. And he's the one who traveled the road less traveled. When he's not traveling, he can be seen presenting in the world's topmost conferences like Arabian Travel Mart, WTM, and other travel conferences. Currently, he's the conference director of TBEX. TBEX is the world's largest and the oldest conference for travel content creators, for digital travel content creators. So, without further ado, let's all welcome Shane Dallas in the first episode of Untold Stories by Travel Sea Ride.
Hello, great to be here for your first episode.
Thank you, Shane. Thanks a lot for being our first guest. I'm sure there are going to be many after this particular episode. So, without further ado, would you want to give our audience a little bit overview about what was the turning point in your life? If I'm not wrong, you are from Australia, but you now live in Kenya. So how did that transition happen? What were the main turning points in your life which shaped you into what you have become today?
I suppose the journey, that's a very good question. I think the journey started well before I was working full-time in this industry. I've always loved travel. My first overseas trip was New Zealand in 1986. And I always like to explore Australia and other places. So I've always done that. I've always spent time going off and around the world and exploring less visited places. So I went to the Middle East for the first time in 1992. So that was a long time before most people ever went there. What happened is I had a government job. I was made redundant in late 2012, and I had the choice to stay in Australia or step into the unknown, which I did. And then once all the skills I'd had previously in Australia really helped me. For example, my photography, I'd been photographing with a camera since the late 1970s, an SLR. I had been public speaking since the 80s, and that enabled me to people started noticing what I was doing on the stages and what I was doing on social media. And that's how I started getting speaking invites and invites to work with brands. And that's how it started, really. So it was a bit of a tough struggle at times. I can assure you, I can tell you how to avoid it if you ask me. But it was a tough struggle, and that's where I am now. I'm basically, most of my interest is now following what I love to do, and my work now does follow my main interest. So things have definitely changed from being a government investigator back in Australia in 2012.
Oh, that's some wonderful journey that you have embarked upon, and I must say you're doing pretty well. So the second part of the question, how did you happen to come to Kenya?
Oh, it's where my family is. So this is where, so they're just off the screen if I look up and right, or keeping themselves occupied during this. But I knew that in Australia, it's a long way from, so if you're in India, there's a big audience around you. There's a large audience around you. In Australia, we have only 24, 25 million people, and New Zealand has 4 million or so. And apart from that, in terms of native English speakers, there's not many within 6 or 7 hours of flying distance, maybe exception of Singapore. Where here, at least I'm 5 hours from Dubai and 7 hours from Europe. And it's a lot closer to a lot of other markets. And most of my work now is the Middle East, Europe, Asia, and North America. So it makes, there's a lot of reasons to be here rather than Australia.
Oh, that's wonderful. So you spoke about your journey and how did you end up in Kenya. So I'm sure there must have been some kind of hurdles also. There must have been some unexpected occasions in your life which might have threatened to derail your journey. Could you recall some of the incidents from your life where you almost thought of giving up but never gave up? Like what were those hurdles?
I think the biggest one I had was in the mid 90s when I contracted chronic fatigue syndrome. And what chronic fatigue does is it means that you have a lot of people have pain associated with it, and I didn't. I was very fortunate that way. But it basically affects the way you think. You can't concentrate on anything for long. You sleep 14, 16 hours a day, and that can last for a year, year and a half. It took me a few years to get fully over it, but I remember and there was no internet back then, well, no internet of note. I mean, I had a modem of 256 kilobytes, which was considered very fast back then. And the problem is that there was no connection. So living at home on my own, I was effectively isolated. And even to go to the supermarket, I could drive down half an hour later. I'd have to come home because I was exhausted and sleep the rest of the day. And that was the reality. But I always believed I would get better. I always believed, and the hope was the important thing. So people talk about difficult times at the moment. And if you have hope, if you believe, you will get through. So for me, what I'm facing now, I'm healthy, which is very fortunate, very blessed. And there's internet where we could work online. So life is a lot easier. Back then in the 90s, when virtually I was isolated because I just couldn't go anywhere, it was hope, the hope that one day this too will pass and I will get better. And that got me through it. That probably was the hardest. That was a very, very tough 18 months. Very, very tough.
Oh, I'm glad you're perfectly healthy and able to do the things that you so love. So, now moving on to the next question, which is like if you were able to give an advice to 10-year younger self of yourself, what advice would you give to yourself? A 10-year younger Shane.
Uh, that's a fairly easy one. So if this is 2010, I would say to online Shane, if you want to move into the travel industry in some way, start preparing. Don't just jump in. You've got to start preparing before you make the move. The disadvantage for me is from the time I was offered redundancy to the time I actually no longer was employed was only a few weeks. So there was no time to make that preparation. It was just sudden. But if I was recommending someone who had control of their time, I'd say 2 years, a year to 2 years in advance, start building up your online platform, get your website ready, get that work ready. I never started my website until 6 months after, almost 6 months after I'd left Australia. So everything was late. And it takes a long time to build that up. Social media, really, I wasn't active on Twitter until 2013. Again, all after. In hindsight, I would do that before. But again, how was I to know in 2012 that I was going to be made redundant? I mean, I was never going to know. So my advice is if you have that plan, if that's what you want to do, you make the plan early. Prepare years out in advance. Don't just say, right, that's it, I'm selling the house and moving. That is a terrible thing to do.
Absolutely.
Look at it as a long-term plan. Don't just, you see people who say, follow me, get my guide, get the books, and I'll tell you how you can sell everything and travel the world. Well, I'm sorry.
No.
Sorry, that is not a realistic option. You will see that most of the people in this industry who make a really long-term career of this have permanent homes. They have permanent homes and they have it for a reason. So make sure you've got your base and then plan in advance before you go. Just don't sell everything and drop everything and head off, because very, very, very few people make that work. More people work if they have a forward plan and have a base instead of constantly moving around all the time.
That's a wonderful advice, Shane, that you gave. Never jump off from a cliff or never take the big leap without taking care of the safety net. It's extremely, extremely important that you have a plan B ready in case your plan A doesn't take off, and be very, very well prepared. That's what I did. That's what most of the people who are successful in their second innings do. Now, moving on to next question, which is very relevant today, and I'm sure Shane would be getting tons of requests, asking this, today. If you go and check out online or even in your normal life, you will see influencers, the so-called influencers everywhere. Every person is calling herself or himself an influencer, whether it's a lifestyle influencer, travel influencer, foodie and all. Why not? It's become so easy because digital is available to everyone's access. So it's super easy to call yourself an influencer or a public figure, but very few can actually make it big in this field. So since Shane is a conference director and he comes in touch with the so-called influencer every day in and out, I would want to know from him that when tourism boards or when companies or brands, they decide to work with an influencer, what is it that they are looking for, and what things should travel content creators keep in mind when they are reaching out to brands for collaboration or new projects?
To keep the cricket analogy going, you just said about the second innings, I would say you need a good batting average. And by that I mean, someone getting a batting average of 45, 50, obviously is going to get more attention than someone doing 25. You need to show, and basically people are chosen when they bat for a team, they're chosen what is their return? What is the return on investment? When we pick you on the team, are you going to score a duck? You've got to score a ton. And it's the same with working in tourism. What is the return on investment? What can I get from you? This is actually very difficult to show, especially on publicity, because you have a long lead-in time. When you're selling travel, when you're selling food, it's a lot easier. You can put something up of a restaurant, a deal, and you just head down to the street and make use of the deal. Travel has a very long lead-in time, 6 months, a year or more. So therefore, you may put the seed of inspiration in someone's mind, but it might take a year before they actually spend the money and realize that inspiration. Therefore, my recommendation is to show more than just publicity, to give more expertise. So if your expertise, and I know yours, for example, is in marketing, that was your background, what marketing can you bring? Mine is photography. What photography knowledge, what photos can I bring to a destination? What is the social media I can bring to a destination? It is more of a strategic way of looking at things. It's not just short-term partnerships and you walk away. What long-term benefits can we offer each other and view it as a business partnership? People who view this as just what I can get out of it for a free holiday or a free weekend in a hotel, they do not last long. They do not last in this industry. I know when I first went to Europe, doing the sort of thing I'm doing now in 2013, 14, I met a lot of people who fell into that category, what I say, the contra stay, staying for 2 nights publicity for a review or whatever. I can tell you there are not many of those left now. Most of the people who did that moved into different areas. They would, for example, offer branding advice, or they would offer some strategy, website design and building to make the website faster. It is what you bring. It's not just, don't just think of yourself as I can give you publicity. Think of what else you can bring that therefore makes it easier to measure your return on investment. So with publicity, you'll find that a lot of people who like publicity are new products, reopenings. For airlines, it might be a new plane, a refurbished cabin, a new destination. They are the people who want publicity. Everyone else doesn't want publicity. They want to see the definite return. What more can you do? What can you help us grow? What can you do to A, help us grow our business? And number 2, what can you do to solve any problems we have? So you should be a problem fixer as well. And the people who do this, who have a look at that wider scope, that big term strategy, they're the ones who do better. Without a doubt, they are the ones who do better. Unless, and the one exception is if you have a significant amount of website traffic and you earn a lot from affiliates. So therefore you just build up your content over a long period of time and get 100,000 plus hits on your site a month with good traffic. But unless you've got that and you're in something else early on, I would be looking more at the strategy side for sure.
Okay, that's a great advice. Now, Shane, see, once you become big and successful, it's very easy. Then you don't have to go out looking for work. Brands usually come to you. But what about the people who are just starting off? Because you'll see that many of our audience today who are listening to you are the ones who are either in a full-time job or planning to make it big, follow your steps or my steps, So what practical tips would you give those people who want to start now?
Exactly what I was saying before. Plan in advance. Before you make the jump, you should be doing this 2 years in advance, I'd recommend. And start by, if you like traveling anyway, so a lot of the content that I put on the site, thetravelcamel.com, a lot of that occurred even before I did this as a job. This was from my usual travels. Places are stuck in there, like travels into places like Yemen and Ethiopia and North Korea. That was before what I'm doing now is full time. It was all before that. So you will accumulate content as you go along. And the object is to get that content out. Is, for example, starting on social media, one of the things that people do is they join social media, do "Hi, I'm here" posts and start following people. The reality is that people aren't going to follow you back if you've got one tweet. So what I would recommend you do is put a lot of content on it, not a lot in one day, just build it up over time, a month or 2 months, every few days, put a photo out, put a tweet, share an article about a destination, do something. Make sure your profile is looking good because you've only got one chance to capture someone's attention. And that goes the same with this. It's all baby steps. There is no such thing as an overnight success. As one actor said, and I can't remember what it was, it took me years of work to become an overnight success. I can't remember who said that, but it's true. So you just need to take these small steps. And yes, maybe there is a brand that you can work with that's a contra deal, for example, because it's something that you would like to work with them long term in the future, and you might be testing out the waters. I don't see any issue with that whatsoever. But you should be seeing it as a means to an end of a long-term relationship, not just doing it for the sake of doing it.
Fantastic. Yeah, those are really important tips that our users can follow. Now, let's take on some audience questions. There were like a lot of people who sent us questions. So we have picked 2-3 questions from the lot. So first question is from Kuwar. He runs a eco farm in India. And his question is, which are your top 3 destinations around the globe?
Top 3 destinations. Okay. Given in my experiences at the time I visited, and I'll do them on 3 to 1. Number 3 was Syria. I visited in 2008. There's certain things I look for in a destination. History, culture, attractions, food, transport, hospitality. And these 3 countries excel in all 3 of these. So number 3 is Syria. Outstanding place when I visited in 2008. Incredible hospitality, places like Crater Chevalier is unbelievable. Number 2 is Iran. It was my 100th country, actually, in 2016. It was my 100th country. And what a great way to have a 100th country, something that got number 2 on my list. Amazing hospitality. You go into places such as Shiraz and Esfahan, and Esfahan is one of the greatest cities of the world, just truly incredible. And number 1 is India. First visited in 2004. Then again in 2006, and then again last year, 2019. A bit of a long rain break, if we use the cricket analogy again, between the second and third visits, for sure. But it's still my number 1 destination because it feels like the whole world in one nation with so much diversity of languages, cultures, food. It's just got everything. So India for me is still my favorite. So those are the top 3 destinations I've visited around the world, out of more than 100 countries that I've visited.
Super. I'm so glad that we have India right up there, really. And two of these destinations are my really, really favorite destinations where I'm dying to go, both Syria and Iran. I would really, really love to go there. Now, we have another question from Purnima. So, Purnima wants to know that, what destinations would you recommend for the people who are either on the little older side or are not physically so fit now? So, what destinations would you recommend for them?
Okay, excellent question, because first, I'm over 50, and second, I'm an asthmatic. I don't really get serious asthma. I've never had to go to hospital for it, but it is a consideration. So my advice for you, if you are that side, are getting a bit older, or there are health issues, that is to make sure you've got your medication with you at all times. Make sure you've got great travel insurance, and also be aware of going to very remote destinations. So the most remote place I've been to was the Wakhan Corridor in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in 2013. And it was the last week of May, and I was the first tourist of the season. Shows you how many tourists they get, don't you? And having the good medical kit with all the bandages and the throat gargle and the creams and the medication was essential, because there is no help in something so isolated. There is just no help anywhere. And therefore, that's important. Thankfully, there are many, many places in the world that you are still able to travel if there's some health issues, or maybe mobility is not as good. Many places where I'm talking to you from in Kenya, it caters very well. They will take you to the airport, they'll fly you, pick you up from the game lodge, take you there. Fantastic vehicles, specialized vehicles that handle the bumps very well. Most options are open to you. You'll be glad to know. Most options, the only options that aren't are, one, those that are isolated. We are isolated from medical facilities. And number two, where anything that's an extreme. So I wouldn't be going, say, to trek to the base camp of Everest, for example. And it's not something I can do. I cannot do this. Doesn't matter. In Kilimanjaro, everyone says it's great. Impossible for me. But this still doesn't mean you don't write off Tanzania as a destination. There's still plenty else to see. It's just a matter of a bit of planning. Have a look at what level of service is offered. Have a look at the exertion levels and places you go. There is so much beauty in the world to see, and you do not have to physically exert yourself. So my question to you, I live this myself. I've seen 100 countries in the world, and I'm an asthmatic. So it is possible. It is possible to do, but you just got to pick your destinations a bit more carefully.
Yeah, that's a good advice. And I'm glad to know that, Africa is pretty safe, and I'm sure Purnima would love to go to Africa. Now, we have a very interesting question, which is from Bhishma. He says that, with the current ongoing situation, with the COVID-19, what should be the major steps or precaution measures we should take care of to travel sustainably and as a responsible traveler, and how we should protect the places by joint effort of travelers and tourists?
An excellent question. There's the quote which says, leave nothing but footprints, take nothing but photos. I disagree with that, because what it means is that you're not bringing any benefit to the community. So what you should be ensuring to do is that you bring benefit to the local community that where you go. It's not just enough to come in, take the photos and leave no trace. That's not it. You need to leave that benefit. So I would encourage you to use local, eat local, use local hotel providers, locally owned, use locally run restaurants, which is a lot easier to do. It's easier to avoid the franchise restaurants, and use local service providers. Look at these carefully. Also be aware of your needs. And sometimes this is not always possible to do so. I know traveling with my family, we've got a 3-year-old daughter, that we need something that's a bit more luxurious, and sometimes locally owned, sometimes, I'm saying, not all the time, in a minority of cases, that is not possible for me to get. So I may need to go to the international chain, which in a lot of cases is still locally owned. They just kind of buy the naming rights, and so the money still keeps in the economy. I would say slow travel is the better way to travel. The more I've traveled, the slower I travel. It allows you to immerse deeply in a destination and learn more about it. The other advantage is that you save on costs. The less time you spend moving around between cities, the more money you save. And therefore, I would recommend for a traveler for something more sustainable, I would say it's better to go to 3 cities in 2 weeks than go to 7 cities in 2 weeks. And it's more relaxing. You get a deeper appreciation. It's cheaper. It's more enjoyable. You connect with the local people more because people get used to seeing you at the same restaurant every day, for example, and you start building up that connection with others. So an excellent question, beyond the scope of this answer I can give because it's so detailed. But I fully agree. I think you need to be mindful where your money's going to, how you spend it, and ensure when you go to a place, you leave a benefit. You just don't go and leave by just taking only photos and leaving no footprints. You need to go beyond that now.
That's a fantastic advice that when you travel to a place, you should leave a benefit for the local community. That by doing that, you not only have an enriching experience for yourself, but also the community, and you make lifelong friendship with those people. Whenever you will need to go back again, you would need not look for a hotel. You'll have a family waiting for you. So now the last question, because we have a little less time. So the next question is from Sangeeta. She is a travel operator and a tour operator in Nepal. She is majorly into adventure tourism. So her question is, how do you see travel world after COVID-19 recovery? How long will it take for travelers to feel secured for traveling, and what changes can we expect in the travelers' pattern?
Excellent question from the pal. Excellent question. I'm not a medical person, so I can't tell you when things will get back to normal. I do not have the expertise, so I'm not going to predict. But one thing I will say is that if you rely on tourism from within your country, you will recover more quickly. If you rely on tourists more from the Asia, Africa, Middle East region, you will recover more quickly. I have seen many cases of places I've visited where people from Europe, North America, Australia, like me, they tend to stay away from travel longer after there are either safety concerns or health concerns. It's just the reality. I remember when the Ebola outbreak was in West Africa, which was in 2016, around then. The Kenyan tour operators were complaining how many people were cancelling, even though Kenya, nor any adjoining country to Kenya, had Ebola in 2016, and these were the Europeans. I met the CEO of Sri Lankan Airlines a month after the terrorist attack or the bombing in Colombo, and I asked him how were the bookings heading up, and he told me that the bookings from the only 2 countries that had dropped the bookings were Australia and the British.
Oh.
The Asians kept travelling. I remember being in Egypt when it was considered not to be, safety was some sort of concern for the Western media, hardly any Europeans, a whole bunch of Chinese tourists there. And there was a report done, I think it was by IATA, talked about the airline industry comparing China and Australia. They said when both countries had reached single figures in terms of new coronavirus cases in a day, the Australian market, I think, had dropped 90%, yet that's the internal flight market in China had only dropped 60%. And China was seeing a recovery far quicker. And that's because I think people in Asia, and this includes India and Malaysia and Singapore, they tend to travel more. They tend not to be bought in by a lot of the negative spin of the media. And therefore, if your markets are from those, that's where your markets are coming from, I think you will recover more quickly than, for example, of 100% of your audience, of your customers' clientele is from Europe. In general, people from the areas I mentioned, Asia, Middle East, and Africa, they will travel more quickly after a problem or less likely to cancel when a situation occurs. So I'd say those markets and the local markets, if you have local domestic tourism, will increase at a faster rate. If you are relying solely on Europe, North America, or Australia, I would say you have a bit more time to wait before benefits will be realized.
Oh, that's a good news for the operators from the Asian market that they will see travelers coming sooner than the rest of the market. So that's a good note to end our conversation on. But before we go, Shane, how can our viewers find you online? If they want to follow your journey, how should they reach out to you?
Okay, you can visit the website, thetravelcamel.com, thetravelcamel.com, and also on Twitter, The Travel Camel, and Instagram, The Travel Camel. So that's where you can find us here at The Travel Camel.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot for joining us today for a fantastic, insightful session where Shane not only shared his stories from his life but also shared some valuable inputs on how you can become a digital content creator. So that brings us to the end of the show. We'll come back to you next week with another brand new episode from somewhere around the world, talking to another inspiring people. Till then, be safe and take care. Thanks a lot.